Hello literature connoisseurs. This is my review of Tribulation Farce. I have been mockingly calling it Childish Farce, although it should be Childish Farce because of how poorly it is written. There is very little in the way of theology in this book, so there has not been much to comment on except towards the end. Mostly we have the authors using their own interpretation of Bible verses based on their own assumptions and not on proper hermeneutics. The problem with the Bible is that it's vague and ambiguous when it comes to prophecy. Examples of this can be found with the supposed prophecies of Nostradamus. There was one prophecy where he states he saw two brothers standing side by side and a large bird flew into them. The events of September 11 were claimed to be the fulfillment of this prophecy by stretching the interpretation. Because the towers hit were twin towers, it gets claimed that the two brothers represent the towers. The large bird is supposed to represent the airplane. Ignoring the fact that if the brothers were towers, then why not say towers? They did exist in Nostradamus' days and times. This is the problem with prophecy. You need to do all these mental gymnastics in order to make them fit. Another example is the first four seals mentioned in the book of Revelations. When each seal is opened, the writer says he sees a rider on horseback appear. The colors go from white to red to black, and finally a pale color. It should be mentioned that in the New Testament Greek the pale color gets translated as a sickly green color. These horsemen get translated differently depending on whom you speak to. Some translate these as being four different riders. Some have even suggested that they are the same rider but that the horse changes color because of the destruction he brings. He starts out on a white horse, but when he unleashes his minions of war, his horse becomes covered with blood, turning it red. After the war, the blood dries and the horse looks black. Finally, the fallout of the death and destruction makes the horse look ugly and pale instead of its once beautiful white color. The real question is, how do we know which interpretation is the correct one? Or is there another interpretation that is the correct one? That is the problem with prophecies, that unless they are vague and ambiguous, they fail. Think of the prophecies that most Christians cherry-pick and ignore that failed. These were very specific prophecies that leave little room for interpretation, but often Christians ignore their failure. Such as the Isaiah prophecy that states that a virgin will give birth and name him Emmanuel. Yet never once was Jesus named this, so Jesus doesn't fulfill the prophecy. There was a prophecy against the city of Tyre that said King Nebuchadnezzar would completely destroy it and no one will ever live there again. However, the city still exists today and people live there. King Nebuchadnezzar was never able to conquer it. Alexander the Great was later the one to conquer it, so Christians try to rewrite their Bibles by saying that Alexander the Great destroying Tyre was the fulfillment of that prophecy, even though the text specifically says King Nebuchadnezzar. They also ignore that the text says no one will ever live there again, even though it is still populated today. There is also another prophecy that says that Egypt will become abandoned and no one will ever live there again either, and the Nile River will dry up. However, the Nile still exists, as does Egypt. Christians, as well as other religions, will wholeheartedly believe in their prophecies if they are mundane. Something like there will be wars and people will spread rumors about it, make them think that their religion is real. Every time a new war happens, this new fulfillment of a mundane claim becomes the absolute fulfillment of that supposed prophecy until the next one happens and it starts all over again in a never-ending loop. Towards the end of this book, the authors have a rabbi reveal his findings about a simple 3-year research study to find out who the Jewish Messiah might be. This has been a question that has gone unanswered for eons. Christians believe their Messiah is the correct one, while the Jewish community has believed that there are numerous Messiahs to fill the role. To the Jewish community, the role of Messiah is an archetype that can be applied to anyone that becomes a hero to save Jewish people. Which is why they reject the idea that the Christian Messiah is the one and only fulfillment of that archetype. A 3-year study can hardly account to answer a question that people throughout the ages have been unable to answer. A former Jewish author turned Christian named Alfred Edersheim supposedly wrote a book claiming that the Old Testament has some 400 messianic prophecies. He then states that the Christian Messiah fulfilled 300 of these prophecies. The problem again is that there is much debate about those 400 prophecies because Jewish leaders and rabbis argue that certain prophecies that are mentioned in the book are not believed to be messianic. The claim gets made that the Christians are cherry-picking to try and make their Messiah seem valid even though he never fulfilled the major prophecies about the Messiah. Moving on, the overall story and character development are horrible. The main complaint and also the reason why I changed the title to Childish Force is how the characters act throughout this book. The characters are supposed to be adults yet they act like 5-year-old children. Chloe is a college student who spends the first half of the book throwing temper tantrums because she's not getting her way. She jumps at conclusions without knowing all the facts yet she gets paraded around as if she is extremely intelligent. Not sure how legit that is considering she eats like a toddler and can't eat a meal without it getting all over her face. The narcissists Rayford and Buck are no different as they keep looking down on women as being inferior. The only good part of this book is that worthless Bruce dies. He was such a worthless character it's no wonder he was the first to go. For someone that went to school to be a pastor and has been a youth pastor he seems to have no idea what a pastor does. Everyone that comes to him for help and advice gets turned away. He sets up this Tribulation Force group to fight the Antichrist but the shelter he builds is only big enough for himself. As he puts it, the rest of the church can fend for themselves. Rayford keeps proclaiming that he will remain faithful to his former wife and is not interested in dating anyone else but when he sees that Amanda will make a good slave because of how subservient she is, he decides to marry her. Nikolai is gaining power like Palpatine from Star Wars. He divides the world into 10 nations and when 3 rebel they are calling this World War III. It's not really a world war if you put down a couple of rebel fractions. This Christian notion of World War III starting constantly gets blown out of proportion. A few other things that seem to happen with very little explanation why, was Buck's old boss Steve gets demoted and put in charge of a West Coast version of a newspaper Nikolai controls while Buck is in charge of the East Coast version. This begs the question, what about the rest of the world? Nikolai's newspaper would allow him to influence the rest of the world but not if it's only available in the United States. The only other strange thing is that in Revelations chapter 11, the 2 witnesses are reported to be preaching at the temple in Jerusalem. However, the authors have them going off and preaching in football stadiums. So the authors are taking creative license on the 2 fakes. This is problematic because how much else are they doing that to? We learn that Hattie has become pregnant yet nothing in the Bible says the Antichrist will have children. The last point is that Nikolai creates a universal religion that is supposed to combine all the world's religions into one religion. However, this seems only limited to Christianity as the one world religion becomes Catholic with Protestants the supposed only ones opposing this, leaving every other non-Christian religions without a voice or opinion. Because of the differences between religions there has never been a successful universal religion. Most religions have irreconcilable differences that cannot be simply ignored. So if the Bible is true and valuable, like Christians claim, then why is it outdated and needs to be rewritten for a modern generation by the authors? If a God wrote it you would think it would be timeless, clear and unconfusing, and not open to a wide variety of interpretations. This concludes my review of Childish Farce. See you next time for Chapter 1 of Nikolai.